A week after Ukrainian commandos cleared the last few Russian troops hunkering in the besieged PJSC Volchansky chemical aggregate plant in Vovchansk, in northern Ukraine's Kharkiv Oblast, the Russians sought revenge. It ended in disaster for the Russians, assaulting Ukrainian positions northwest of the 30-building chemical campus, the equivalent of half a Russian battalion. 17 MTLB armored tractors, 3 tanks, and no fewer than 100 infantry crashed into a wall of Ukrainian firepower. The Ukrainian Army's 57th Motorized Brigade blasted the Russian assault group with hovering drones, dropping grenades among other weapons, most likely. When the smoke cleared, 16 MTLBs and a tank lay wrecked. There were literal piles of dead and mangled Russians around the smoldering hulks. Now the guys are finishing off the remaining infantry, one Ukrainian blogger reported. It's not hard to understand what happened. The Russian infantry rode into battle on top of the 13-ton MTLBS, around 10 men per vehicle, apparently calculating that the top-down drone threat was less serious than the bottom-up threat from mines. It wasn't a totally unreasonable assumption. The obsolete, thinly armored MTLBS are notoriously prone to burn when struck from below by mines. But the Russians seemingly underestimated how much damage the 57th Motorized Brigade's grenade-dropping drones could inflict on massed mechanized forces. The Ukrainians have steadily improved their drone-dropped munitions, adding more sensitive fuses and more powerful explosive fills. So the top-riding infantry rolling toward the chemical plant may have been fairly safe from mines, but they were catastrophically vulnerable to drones. This is a problem for the wider Russian military as it pulls more 1970s vintage MTLBs out of long-term storage to replace some of the thousands of newer and more heavier BMP fighting vehicles the Russians have lost in 31 months of hard fighting in Ukraine. The infantry attached to these MTLB units will face the same impossible choice: risk mine blasts while riding inside the old tractors or risk drone attacks while riding atop them. It's not a uniquely Russian problem, of course, as the Ukrainian armed forces are also regenerating old MTLBs in order to replace newer and heavier vehicles they've lost. But the Ukrainians are defending in more sectors than they're attacking. The Russians are attacking in more sectors than they're defending. The defending Ukrainians can leave their MTLBs behind and dig in. The attacking Russians often have no choice but to roll out in their death trap vehicles and try to cross contested terrain in order to reach Ukrainian lines. Unless and until the war's momentum shifts and the Ukrainians go on the attack more widely along the 700-mile front line, Ukrainian troops can, for the most part, wait for Russian troops to come to them. More and more, the Russians will attack on top of aged armored tractors, easy targets for hovering drones. On May 10th, Russian troops surged across the Russia-Ukraine border north of the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Attacking south through sparse Ukrainian defenses, the Russians quickly occupied much of Vovchansk, a town with a pre-war population of 17,500 that lies just 3 miles from the border. A month later, amid furious fighting in Vovchansk, Russian troops captured a key stronghold in the center of the increasingly devastated town: the PJSC Volchansky chemical aggregate plant, a sprawling complex of 30 tough concrete buildings. The aggregate plant could have functioned as a kind of base covering Russian forces crossing the Vovcha River, just south of the plant. Instead, it became a trap. Ukrainian troops held the line just outside the plant and then counterattacked, advancing a few blocks north of the plant and cutting it off from the main Russian force. It took a grueling 3 months, but commandos from the Ukrainian Intelligence Directorate, also known by its acronym GUR, finally cleared the plant of the last Russian occupiers on Tuesday. The fighters of the GUR carried out a systematic sweep of the plant's buildings, constantly engaging in contact battles with the enemy in densely built-up conditions, the Directorate announced. In some cases, Ukrainian special forces engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the enemy.
Бачиш, да, ціль?
The GUR completely liberated the territory of the Vovchansk aggregate plant and destroyed the occupiers and all the buildings of the enterprise, the directorate added. Some Russians were killed, others were captured. It's unclear how many Russians were still alive in the plant at the time of its liberation. Early in the battle, there were reportedly hundreds of Russians spread across the 30 buildings, a daunting force. They enjoyed some fire support from Russian artillery staged to the north, and reportedly got some supplies delivered by small drones. The Ukrainians dropped bombs, harassed the Russians in the plant with drones and snipers, and waited. For months, the aggregate plant was, according to Ukrainian analysis group Deep State, like a shooting range for the Ukrainians who could shoot at it at their leisure, and from all directions. The Ukrainian armed forces took pleasure in destroying the occupiers, Deep State noted. As the Russian offensive in Vovchansk petered out this summer, Ukrainian counterattacks gradually pushed the front line in the town farther north, leaving the Russians in the chemical plant even more isolated than before.
Цель 105, один огонь.